everybody, and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Jones, and today we are making some king oyster mushrooms 3 different ways. Now, I absolutely adore mushrooms, and I hope you do too. They are so versatile, which means that you can use them to replace meat in all kinds of different recipes. Really, you can use them to replace chicken, beef, bacon, seafood, and I'm sure all kinds of other things. They just have a really nice kind of meaty, hearty texture, and they readily absorb the flavors of whatever you're cooking them in. So they're guaranteed to be delicious every time. Now, this is actually going to be the first video in a series that I am doing on plant-based meat replacements. I know there's been a lot of meat shortages lately because of the virus, and whether it's because of that or if you're just trying to transition to eating more plant-based foods for your health or for the environment or for ethical reasons, meat can be one of the hardest things for people to understand how to replace when they're transitioning to a plant-based diet. So I want to make it really easy for you, and I'm going to be providing recipes that mock the texture of chicken, beef, bacon, seafood, pork, you name it, I am going to cover it. So we're starting with mushrooms because, like I said, they have a really nice meaty texture and they're just great for replacing meat in your recipes. So I have 3 recipes for you today. The first is for vegan scallops. The second is for a stir fry using the king trumpet mushrooms, and this was actually supposed to be another scallops recipe, but because I didn't have the real oyster mushrooms, it turned out a little bit different, but still very, very delicious. And the third is for what I call a chicken noodle soup, again using the king trumpet mushrooms, and you will be so surprised at what you can do with these mushrooms to make them just like chicken, and you would never miss the chicken in this soup. It's a really hearty soup and one of my favorite go-to recipes. So before we get started, make sure you subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so that you get notified every time I post a new video. Give this video a thumbs up and leave a comment. All of these things really help my channel grow and help me to provide you with more delicious vegan recipes and information on living a plant-based lifestyle. So without any further ado, let's get started. Our first recipe is going to be for some delicious vegan scallops. For this recipe, we are using actual king oyster mushrooms because they have these nice, straight, thick stems. And we're going to cut those stems into 3/4 of an inch to an inch thick pieces. Just do that with all of your mushrooms, and then we're going to score each piece with a knife. So we're just cutting some little lines into the mushrooms so that they absorb the flavors of the sauce that we're going to cook them in. So once we're done doing that, we're going to put some vegan butter into a nice hot skillet and just make sure the bottom of the pan is completely covered with the butter. And then we're going to put our mushroom pieces or scallops into the butter and cook those until they're nice and golden brown. And then we're going to flip them over until they are golden brown on the other side as well. If your pan is looking a little dry, you might want to add some more vegan butter because you want to make sure that your mushrooms are getting nice and golden brown on both sides. Next, we're going to use some of this Japanese multi-purpose seasoning that I found at Trader Joe's. It's got nori and sea salt and sesame seeds in it, and it's really yummy and just adds a nice sort of flavor of the sea to these vegan scallops. And then I also added a little bit of black pepper, and then I flipped those mushrooms over one more time just so the flavors of that seasoning will kind of cook into the mushrooms. Next, I added some mirin, which is sort of the Japanese version of a cooking sherry. It's a rice wine. And I just added a few splashes of that, which is probably a tablespoon or so. And then I let the mushrooms continue to cook in that for a couple of minutes. And here are our delicious golden vegan scallops. And now we're going to add those to a vegan fettuccine Alfredo. I'm starting this sauce by just roasting some garlic on a skillet. And then I added 1 package of a silken type of tofu to my blender. And then to that, I added some fresh squeezed lemon juice from half a lemon. Then I also added my roasted garlic cloves and some pepper and some salt, and then some more of those fresh chives. These are fresh from my garden and I have been putting them in everything. They are especially good in this recipe, so try not to skip out on the chives. Then I just blend that up, and you'll probably need to scrape down the sides at some point and continue to blend. And then at the last minute, I decided to add some of this umami seasoning, also from Trader Joe's, which added a really nice flavor to it. So I just continued to blend that until it was totally smooth. While the mushrooms were cooking, I had some pasta boiling, but then I had drained it and it cooled and got a little bit dried out, so I added some pasta water and then started adding my Alfredo sauce. Now I only used about 2/3 of a package of pasta, and I ended up using about 2/3 of the sauce. So if you're using a whole package of pasta, you will probably be using all of the sauce. And I added a little more pasta water to that to thin it out so that all the pasta would get coated with that delicious sauce. Now I didn't exactly use fettuccine. These were actually some brown rice, gluten-free pasta, so use what you have. And then I'm serving this on a bed of some fresh spinach. And then I just added my pasta on top. And then I started adding my vegan scallops. I sprinkled some more of those chopped chives on top for looks and for flavor, and some toasted sesame seeds as well. And this dish was so delicious and so easy to make. And if you make this for guests, you'll be sure to impress them. Okay, for our next recipe, we're going to be using these king trumpet mushrooms, which are very similar to the king oyster mushrooms because they're very large and very thick, but they're a little more like traditional oyster mushrooms, and you can use them for scallops. In fact, this was supposed to be another scallop recipe, but it kind of morphed into something different, but still very, very delicious. So I scored the larger pieces just like you would with the oyster mushrooms, and then fried them in some oil until they were nice and golden brown on both sides. Once the mushrooms were fully cooked and golden brown on both sides, I set them aside on some paper towels to help absorb some of the excess oil. Once again, I am using some of those fresh chives from my garden, but if you don't have access to chives, you could use scallions instead. And then I'm also mincing up some garlic very finely, and this is going to go into the sauce. So I added 2 tablespoons of vegan butter to my skillet, and then I added my chives and my garlic. Then I just gave that a little stir and let it cook down for just a couple of minutes before adding some white wine. I believe this was about a cup of white wine, and don't worry about the alcohol because we're going to reduce this, and that burns off any of the alcohol content and just leaves the nice wine flavor. So you can see here how it's kind of emulsified with the butter and made a nice creamy sauce. And now we're going to add the mushrooms back to it, and just get those all nice and coated in the sauce, and we'll just let that cook for a couple of minutes so the mushrooms can absorb all those delicious flavors. This recipe was so delicious and so creamy and yummy, but unfortunately I didn't get any good footage of the final product, just this sad photo with some rice and broccoli, but trust me, it was so good and you definitely want to try this recipe. Now on to our third and final recipe, which is a chicken noodle soup using these king trumpet mushrooms once again. These mushrooms are so delicious, and one of the things I love about them is that they're so beautiful, and when you get them out of the package they almost look like a little family of mushrooms. They're just so fun. I love mushrooms. So we're going to shred these, which I almost felt bad about doing this to these mushrooms because they were so beautiful, but it makes a really, really great replacement for shredded chicken. I mean, they're just so shreddable. Look how these just come apart and make these beautiful shreds. And I also use the caps. They're kind of like little chunks of chicken, if you will. And then I just did that to the rest of them until I had a nice big pile of shredded chicken. So for the base of the soup, we are going to start with some green onions or scallions. And if you don't have green onions, you could use regular yellow or white onions, but I really like the flavor of these. And then we're going to finely mince some garlic. I smash it first to get the skins off easily, and then I chop it very finely. Then we're going to cut the carrots, and I like to cut mine in half and then in half again down the long way, because then I can cut them into nice small pieces. And then the same thing with the celery. I like smaller pieces, so I cut them down the center before slicing them into smaller pieces. So I added some oil to a stock pot, but if you don't want to use oil, you could just saute your vegetables in some water. And I actually did end up using a little bit of water to give these a little moisture as they were cooking. I added a little bit of salt and pepper before I added the rest of my vegetables. Then I also added some dried oregano and some dried basil. I don't really measure these things, I just sort of put in however much I feel like putting in. And then I used some veggie bouillon cubes. I normally would use the chicken flavor, which I thought they were, but yeah, they ended up being the vegetable flavor. I should have used that better than bouillon chicken base. It was still really good, but it didn't taste quite the same. So I do recommend using a chicken flavored bouillon cube or bouillon paste. I let that simmer for about 10 minutes before I put in my shredded chicken mushrooms. And I just put all those in there. And then I ended up adding some more water to bring it up to about 8 cups. My filter works really slow, so I had only put about 4 cups in there originally, but you do want about 8 cups of liquid. And then I just let that simmer for another 15 minutes or so before adding the pasta. And I only put in a little bit. You can put in however much you want, but I find that over time it really swells up a lot, so I don't put a ton of pasta in there. I also added some fresh kale. This was also from my garden. I just love being able to use fresh produce from my garden, and I add it in whenever I can. So I just chopped that finely and then added that to the soup and just let it cook for about another 5 minutes. This keeps the kale nice and fresh without overcooking it. I wish I had some fresh parsley, but I didn't have any of that in my garden yet, so I used some dried parsley here at the end, and that is it for this soup. This is really easy to make. Once again, I love easy recipes, and this is such a hearty soup, and you would hardly even miss the chicken. The mushrooms do such a good job. And I served it with some nice toasted sourdough baguette. And man, this is such a delicious and hearty meal. And again, I highly recommend making this. This is such an easy soup, and it is one of my favorite go-to recipes. I hope you like this video and that you'll try one or more of these recipes. If you do, let me know in the comments. They are so delicious and easy and sure to impress your family and your friends. Before you go, make sure you give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you don't miss another video. For now, peace out and eat more mushrooms. Bye!